Step out of the vehicle now, or I'll drag you out myself. The words cut through the humid August night like a blade, and Sharon Bailey felt her pulse slow to that familiar rhythm she'd learned from years of dealing with men like this. The calm that came before calculated action. Through her rearview mirror, she watched Officer Derek Richardson approach her sedan, his hand already resting on his weapon, his body language screaming aggression before he'd even seen her face clearly. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady as she rolled down her window completely, both hands visible on the steering wheel. "Don't you play dumb with me." Richardson's flashlight beam hit her face. His grip tightened on the flashlight. His voice dropped sharper. Like he'd already decided what she was. "You know exactly why you're here." The lie came so easily to him that Sharon almost admired its audacity. She'd been driving exactly 28 miles per hour in a 30-mile zone, had used her signal for a full 3 seconds before changing lanes, and hadn't touched her phone once during the 15-minute drive from the federal building. But she also knew that facts would mean nothing to Derek Richardson, just like they meant nothing to men like Richardson. "I was just heading home from work," she said quietly, watching his partner, Officer Mike Torres, position himself near her passenger side. Torres looked nervous, his eyes darting between her and Richardson like he already knew this stop was about to go wrong. His hand hovered near his own camera for half a second, like he was thinking about turning it off or turning it on. "Work." Richardson laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "What kind of work you do this time of night?" "Let me guess, the kind that requires keeping cash in your glove compartment." This was the moment she'd been preparing for. Every instinct told her to end it. But tonight wasn't about saving herself. It was about catching him doing it. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, injecting just enough anxiety into her voice to sound like what Richardson expected, another powerless victim. "The only misunderstanding," he snarled, yanking her door open with unnecessary force, "is you thinking you can drive through my beat carrying drugs and get away with it." Her phone, left recording on purpose, caught every word. Richardson's body cam was rolling too. And nearby, her team was already in position, watching the stop unfold. Richardson grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. "Turn around and put your hands on the car." As Sharon complied, she caught Torres's eye. The younger officer looked sick, his face pale in the streetlight. She'd read his file. 8 years on the force, no major incidents, a wife and 2 kids at home. He wasn't dirty, just weak. Exactly the kind of cop who'd watch injustice happen and convince himself it wasn't his responsibility to stop it. "Derek, maybe we should just," Torres started. "Maybe you should shut up and do your job," Richardson cut him off, his hands now roughly searching Sharon's pockets. "Unless you got a problem with getting drugs off the street?" The setup was so textbook it was almost boring. Richardson's right hand disappeared into his tactical vest, while his left continued the search, and Sharon knew exactly what was coming next. And in less than 10 minutes, one radio call would expose who was really lying. A small baggie of cocaine, probably the same one he'd used on 3 other innocent drivers this year, based on her investigation, would miraculously appear in her vehicle. Well, Richardson said, his voice dripping with false discovery. "Look what we have here." He held up the baggie like a trophy, making sure Torres could see it clearly. The cocaine glittered under the streetlight, and Sharon felt a cold rage settle in her chest. Not at being set up, she'd expected this. But at thinking of all the people who'd stood in this exact position, innocent and terrified, watching their lives get destroyed by a racist cop's manufactured evidence. "That's not mine," she said, and the genuine disbelief in her voice wasn't an act. Even knowing it was coming, actually watching a police officer plant evidence on her felt surreal. "They all say that," Richardson laughed, tossing the baggie toward Torres. "Bag this up. Looks like at least a felony amount to me." Torres caught the evidence with shaking hands, and Sharon saw the moment his moral cowardice won the battle with his conscience. He pulled out an evidence bag and sealed the cocaine inside, his signature on the chain of custody form sealing his own fate along with Richardson's. "Please," Sharon said, letting real emotion creep into her voice now. Not fear for herself, but grief for every innocent person this had happened to. "I've never done drugs in my life. I have a clean record. This is a mistake." "Mistake?" Richardson grabbed her shoulder and spun her around to face him, his face inches from hers. "The only mistake is you thinking you're better than the laws that apply to everyone else in this neighborhood." His breath smelled like coffee and something else. the sour tang of a man who enjoyed having power over people he considered beneath him. In that moment, Sharon made a decision that would haunt Richardson for the rest of his life. She said nothing. She didn't identify herself, didn't pull out her federal credentials, didn't invoke her position or her power. Instead, she looked Derek Richardson straight in the eye and let him finish what he'd started. Because sometimes the only way to catch a predator was to let him think he'd found the perfect prey. What happened next would destroy everything Derek Richardson thought he knew about power, justice, and the badge he'd spent 12 years hiding behind. "Cuff her," Richardson ordered Torres, pulling out his own restraints. "And call it in. Tell dispatch we've got a felony drug possession, resisting arrest." "Resisting arrest?" Sharon kept her voice level, but let confusion bleed through. "I haven't resisted anything." Richardson smiled. No warmth in it. "You will." That's when he shoved her hard against the car, her cheeks scraping against the metal. The unnecessary violence wasn't random, it was calculated. Make it look like she fought. Make her look guilty on camera. Destroy any credibility she might have later. Torres hesitated, handcuffs dangling from his fingers like he was holding a loaded gun. "Derek, she's been cooperative. Maybe we don't need to." "What part of call it in didn't you understand?" Richardson's voice carried the edge of a man used to being obeyed without question. "Unless you want internal affairs asking why you went soft on a dealer." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Torres's jaw worked for a moment, and Sharon watched him make the choice that would define the rest of his life. He reached for his radio. The cuffs clicked, and a memory hit her. 8 years old, watching her father taken in the same cold metal. A lie in an evidence bag. 2 years stolen. A family never repaired. That 8-year-old girl watching from the window had made a promise. She'd grown up to become the woman who made sure men like Derek Richardson answered for what they did. "Control, this is Unit 47. Torres spoke into his radio, his voice barely steady. "We have a traffic stop at 5th and Maple. One in custody for possession with intent to distribute." The dispatcher's voice crackled back immediately. "Copy, 47. Need backup for transport." Sharon recognized the dispatcher's voice, someone on her team, working undercover. "Negative on backup." Richardson grabbed the radio from Torres. "Suspect is secured. We'll transport to booking. 10 to 4, Unit 47. For my records, can you confirm the suspect's identity?" This was it. The moment that would seal Richardson's fate forever. "Bailey, Sharon." Richardson read from her driver's license, not bothering to hide his contempt. "Age 51, no visible warrants, but we're looking at felony possession charges." There was a pause on the radio. A beat too long. "Copy that. Sharon Bailey. And Derek, just so you know, there's been some chatter about increased federal attention on drug arrests in your sector. Might want to make sure your paperwork is extra clean on this one. And Derek, your body cam is coming through clear tonight." The warning, disguised as routine procedure, was the dispatcher's way of giving Richardson one last chance to back down. One final opportunity to realize he was walking into a trap. Richardson keyed the radio again, and his next words would be played in federal court 6 months later. "Don't worry about the feds. They don't give a damn about cleaning up the streets like we do. This one's going down hard." Torres shot him a look that screamed alarm, but Richardson was too high on his own power to notice. He was the predator. He controlled the narrative. He had the badge, the gun, and the victim in handcuffs. What he didn't have was the slightest idea that Sharon Bailey wasn't just some driver. Her name was tied to a federal probe that had already ruined careers. "In the car," Richardson ordered, grabbing Sharon's arm again. His grip was different now, harder, more personal, like he was enjoying the control. As he guided her toward the patrol car, Sharon caught sight of Torres hanging back near her sedan. The younger officer was staring at her purse, which had fallen open during the search, its contents spilled across the passenger seat. Her federal ID wasn't visible. She'd been too smart for that. But there were other things. A business card from the Department of Justice. A receipt from the federal building cafeteria dated today. A parking pass with a security clearance level that Torres would recognize. She watched his face change as the pieces started falling into place. His eyes went wide, then panicked, then absolutely terrified. "Derek," Torres called out, his voice strange and high. "Derek, we need to talk." "We'll talk at the station," Richardson replied, forcing Sharon into the back seat. The partition between front and back was solid steel and bulletproof glass, designed to keep suspects exactly where they belonged, powerless and silent. But as Richardson slammed the door shut, Sharon Bailey wasn't thinking like a suspect. She was thinking like the woman who'd spent her entire career hunting men like Derek Richardson, who'd built her reputation on patient, methodical destruction of corrupt cops who thought their badges made them untouchable. She was thinking about the recording device in her purse, still running. About the dispatcher, already alerting the task force that the trap had been sprung. About the surveillance teams that had eyes on the stop the entire time. Most of all, she was thinking about tomorrow morning, when Derek Richardson would wake up in a federal holding cell and finally understand what it felt like to be powerless. Torres approached the driver's side window. His face had gone gray. "Derek, I really think we should. Get in the car, Mike." Richardson's patience was wearing thin. "We've got paperwork to file." But Torres didn't move. He stood frozen next to the patrol car, staring at Sharon through the rear window with the expression of a man who'd just realized he'd helped arrest someone federal you don't ever want to handcuff on camera. Torres didn't stop it. He didn't speak up. He just stood there, watching, while Richardson drove off with her in cuffs. And that silence was going to cost him. 3 miles away, the dispatcher was already making a call that would change everything. The ride to the station took 12 minutes. 12 minutes that would destroy Derek Richardson's life, his family's future, and everything he thought he understood about power. From the back seat, Sharon watched Torres fidget in the passenger seat like a man sitting on a bomb. Every few seconds, he'd glance back at her through the partition, then at Richardson, then out the window like he was looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "You're sweating, Mike," Richardson said, turning up the air conditioning with the casual confidence of a man who'd done this dance 100 times before. "First drug caller making you nervous?" "It's not my first," Torres replied quietly. "Right. But this one feels different, doesn't it?" Richardson's eyes found Sharon in the rearview mirror. "This one feels personal. Like maybe our friend back there thought she was above the law." Sharon met his gaze and said nothing. Let him talk. Let him dig his grave deeper with every word. What Richardson didn't know was simple. Tonight wasn't random. Tonight was recorded. And people in his own department had already started talking. "You know what I love about drug dealers?" Richardson continued, warming to his theme. "They always think they're smarter than us. Always got some story about how the drugs aren't theirs, how they're innocent, how we planted evidence." Torres made a sound that might have been agreement or nausea. "But here's the thing," Richardson said, pulling into the station parking lot. "Nobody believes them. Judge, jury, prosecutor. They all know that cops don't plant evidence. That's just something guilty people say when they get caught." The irony was so perfect that Sharon almost laughed. Instead, she committed every word to memory, adding them to the growing list of statements that would be read back to him in federal court. As they parked, Torres's phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Then started ringing. "Jesus, Mike, answer your phone," Richardson said, getting out of the car. "Your wife checking up on you again?" Torres looked at the caller ID, and his face went from gray to white. It's the captain. Anderson? At this hour." Richardson paused, his hand on Sharon's door handle. "Probably wants to congratulate us on the caller. Answer it." But Torres was staring at his phone like it was a snake. Because he'd finally put the pieces together. Federal documents. Department of Justice business card. A woman who stayed too calm, too controlled, even with drugs planted on her and cuffs on her wrists. And now the captain was calling at 2:17 a.m. "Mike, answer the damn phone." Torres pressed the button with a shaking hand. "Captain Anderson?" The voice that came through the speaker wasn't Anderson's. It was crisp, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its calm authority. "Officer Torres, this is Agent Davidson with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Captain Anderson is currently in federal custody. You need to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. And Derek Richardson? Put him on speaker." The phone slipped from Torres's fingers, clattering to the pavement. Richardson stared at it like it had just spoken in a foreign language. What the hell was that about? That's when Torres broke. "Derek, we need to uncuff her, right now, and pray she doesn't say our names out loud." "Are you out of your mind?" Richardson's voice carried the edge of a man whose world was starting to tilt sideways. "She's got a felony amount of cocaine in evidence. We've got her dead to rights." "No, Derek." Torres was backing away from the car now, his hands up like he was surrendering to an invisible enemy. "We don't have her. She has us." But Derek Richardson had spent 12 years building his reputation on never backing down, never showing weakness, never admitting he was wrong. He'd planted evidence on 19 different people during his career, watched them go to prison, watched their families destroyed, and never lost a moment's sleep. Tonight wasn't going to be different. Get yourself together, Torres. Richardson pulled Sharon out of the back seat with unnecessary force. We're booking her, processing the evidence, and closing this case. Whatever games she's playing, whatever connections she thinks she has, they don't mean shit once she's in the system. Phones started ringing. First Torres's again, then Richardson's. Inside the building, the night desk lit up like something had just happened downtown. Through the station windows, Sharon could see unusual activity. Officers moving quickly, gathering in clusters, talking in urgent whispers. The desk sergeant was on 3 different phones simultaneously, and the normally quiet night shift looked like a kicked anthill. What the hell is going on in there? Richardson muttered, but his grip on her arm never loosened. They were almost at the entrance when a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Then another. Then 3 more. No light bars. No sirens. Just tinted glass and the kind of parking job that assumes permission. Derek, Torres called from behind them, his voice cracking. Please, just look at her purse again. Look at the business cards. Look at the federal building parking pass. Look at the security clearance level. For the first time since the traffic stop began, Derek Richardson hesitated. Not because he was having doubts about his actions, but because the world around him was suddenly full of federal vehicles and ringing phones and an energy that felt like a storm about to break. Who are you? He asked Sharon directly, his voice quieter now, but still carrying the arrogance of a man who believed his badge made him untouchable. Sharon looked him in the eye and spoke for the first time since she'd been arrested. Her voice was calm, clear, and absolutely devastating in its certainty. Call your watch commander. Tell him to check his secure email. Case code Romeo 7 Alpha. The black SUVs cut their engines. Car doors slammed. And Derek Richardson finally understood that he hadn't caught a drug dealer. He'd caught the person who'd been hunting him. Then the station's front doors opened, and a man in a suit walked in like he owned the building. The man in the suit moved through the station like water through a broken dam, smooth, inevitable, and completely unstoppable. Every officer he passed either nodded respectfully or found somewhere else to be. Richardson still had Sharon by the arm, still clinging to the illusion that he controlled this situation. We're processing a suspect, he called out as the agent approached. Official police business. The agent didn't slow down. He was mid-40s, gray at the temples, with the kind of calm that came from having real authority instead of borrowed power. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd ended careers with less evidence than he had tonight. Officer Richardson. Agent Bradford, FBI. Release the suspect immediately. I don't think so. Richardson's grip tightened on Sharon's arm. She's in custody on felony drug charges. You don't have jurisdiction over local. Officer Richardson. Bradford's voice never rose, never sharpened, but somehow it cut through Richardson's bluster like a blade. Look around. That's when Richardson finally noticed what Sharon had been watching for the past 2 minutes. Half the officers in the station were gone. Not on calls, not on breaks, just gone. The ones who remained were clustered around computers, making calls, moving fast, like everyone suddenly remembered they had something to lose. The night sergeant, a 20-year veteran named Paula Hendricks, caught Richardson's eye and shook her head slowly. The gesture was clear. You're on your own. What the hell is happening here? Richardson demanded, but his voice cracked on the last word. Torres stepped up beside him, still pale but trying to salvage whatever he could from the wreckage. Agent Bradford, I want to cooperate fully. Whatever Officer Richardson did. What I did. Richardson spun on his partner. We made a legitimate arrest. We found drugs in her vehicle. We followed procedure. You planted evidence, Torres said quietly. I watched you do it. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Around the station, conversations stopped. Even the phones seemed to pause their ringing. Richardson stared at his partner with the expression of a man watching his closest ally put a knife in his back. You're lying. Derek, your body cam recorded everything. Her phone recorded everything. There are federal agents who watched you do it in real time. Torres's voice was steady now, the voice of a man who'd already chosen his side. It's over. But Derek Richardson had built his entire identity on never backing down, never admitting fault, never showing weakness to anyone who might use it against him. Even now, with federal agents in his station and his partner turning on him, he couldn't let go of the power he'd spent 12 years accumulating. She's a drug dealer, he said, his voice rising. I don't care who she knows or what kind of lawyers she can afford. The evidence is solid. The arrest is valid. Agent Bradford pulled out his phone and touched the screen twice. Would you like to hear your voice, Officer Richardson? From about 30 minutes ago. The recording played. Clear enough. Asterisk, well. Look what we have here. Asterisk. Richardson's recorded voice filled the station lobby, followed by Sharon's response. Asterisk, that's not mine. Asterisk. Asterisk, they all say that. Bag this up. Looks like at least a felony amount to me. Asterisk. Then came the part that would be played at his trial, his sentencing, and probably his parole hearings for the next decade. Asterisk, don't worry about the feds. They don't give a damn about cleaning up the streets like we do. This one's going down hard. Asterisk. And in 5 minutes, Richardson's lawyer would make one phone call that made things worse. Bradford stopped the recording. Would you like to hear more? We have 37 minutes of audio from tonight alone. The lobby was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of phones ringing in empty offices. That's clipped, Richardson said, but his voice sounded hollow even to himself. I want the full file and the chain of custody. You're right to ask, Bradford agreed. Due process is important. But we also have your body cam, Torres's body cam, and independent cameras that cover that intersection. Each revelation hit Richardson like a physical blow. His face went from defiant to confused to desperate. But most importantly, Bradford continued, we have something better than video evidence. He nodded toward the station entrance, where 2 more agents were escorting a man in handcuffs. Captain Frank Anderson looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 6 hours. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes were red, and he walked with the defeated posture of a man who'd already given up everything to save himself. Captain Anderson has been very talkative tonight, Bradford said. Surprisingly cooperative, actually. He's provided us with a detailed account of department policies regarding evidence planting, case fixing, and testimony coordination. Anderson's eyes found Richardson across the lobby. The look that passed between them wasn't anger or betrayal. It was pity. The captain mouthed 2 words that Richardson couldn't quite make out, but Torres caught them clearly enough. I'm sorry. Derek, Torres said quietly, uncuff her. Please. Before this gets any worse. But Richardson's world was collapsing too fast for rational thought. Every anchor point he'd built his life around was breaking loose. His captain was in federal custody. His partner had turned on him. His department was being gutted while he watched. The only thing he had left was the arrest. The one piece of evidence that proved he was right, they were wrong, and his badge still meant something. No. His grip on Sharon's arm became painful. She's a criminal. She had drugs in her car. I saw them with my own eyes. Derek, Agent Bradford's patience was wearing thin. You put them there. Prove it. Bradford smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Officer Richardson, uncuff Ms. Bailey. Now. Then step away from her. I want a lawyer, Richardson said. That's your right, Bradford replied. But first, you're going to release Ms. Bailey. I'm not releasing anyone. This is my arrest, my evidence, my jurisdiction. Agent Bradford looked at Sharon for the first time since he'd entered the station. The look that passed between them told Derek Richardson everything he needed to know about how deep this conspiracy went, how long they'd been planning this moment, and how completely he'd been set up. But even then, even with the walls closing in and his career ending in real time, he couldn't understand that he hadn't just arrested the wrong person. He'd walked into a trap built for men exactly like him. Ma'am, Bradford said quietly, would you like to tell him, or should I? And that's when Derek Richardson learned who he'd really arrested. Sharon Bailey stepped forward, and for the first time since the traffic stop began, Derek Richardson felt her presence fill the room. Not as a victim, not as a suspect, but as something else entirely. Something that made federal agents straighten their posture and veteran cops suddenly find reasons to be somewhere else. Officer Richardson, she said, her voice carrying an authority that made his grip on her arm feel suddenly foolish. Remove the handcuffs. I don't take orders from drug dealers. Agent Bradford pulled out his phone again, but this time he didn't play audio. He showed Richardson the screen. A Department of Justice website, an official photograph, and a title that made the blood drain from Richardson's face. Director Sharon Bailey, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The same face. The same eyes. The same woman he'd shoved against his patrol car 37 minutes ago. That's... Richardson's voice came out as a whisper. That's not possible. Director Bailey led this field audit personally because the last 3 whistleblowers had their cases buried before sunrise. Officer Derek Richardson, Sharon said, and now her voice carried the weight of someone whose signature moved federal resources. You're under arrest for civil rights violations, assault, and evidence tampering. The handcuffs fell from Richardson's fingers, clattering to the floor like broken dreams. I didn't know, he said, backing away from her. I didn't know who you were. That's the point, Derek. Sharon rubbed her wrists where the metal had left marks. You didn't need to know. You planted evidence on someone you thought was powerless. Someone you thought couldn't fight back. The station lobby was silent, except for the sound of Derek Richardson's world ending one revelation at a time. The traffic stop was random, he said desperately. I was just doing my job. The route wasn't random. But what you did tonight was. Agent Bradford consulted his phone. Director Bailey has been conducting field investigations into police corruption for the past 6 months. Tonight's route was chosen specifically because it passes through your patrol sector at shift change. You set me up. No, Derek. Sharon's voice was quiet now, almost gentle. You set yourself up. I just gave you the opportunity to do what you've been doing to innocent people for years. Torres, who had been silent during the revelation, finally found his voice. How many? He asked. How many people have we arrested who were innocent? According to Captain Anderson's statement, Bradford said, consulting his notes, Officer Richardson has planted evidence in at least 19 cases over the past 4 years. 12 of those resulted in felony convictions. 7 defendants are currently serving prison sentences based on Richardson's false testimony. Each number hit Derek like a physical blow. 19 lives destroyed. 12 families broken. 7 innocent people sitting in cells because he'd decided they looked guilty. They were criminals, he said weakly. They may not have had drugs that time, but they were all criminals. John Leonard, Sharon said, reading from her own phone. Age 34, no criminal history, planted evidence case number 1. 2 years in state prison for possession with intent to distribute. Lost his job as a school maintenance worker. Lost custody of his 3 children. Lost his apartment. Currently homeless. She looked up at Richardson. Was John Leonard a criminal, Derek? Richardson didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Jennifer Parker, nursing license gone. Prison time. Life derailed. Stop, Richardson whispered. David Rodriguez, scholarship lost. 3 years for something you planted. Stop. Is David Rodriguez a criminal, Derek? But Sharon wasn't finished. Because the real devastation wasn't the numbers. It was the recognition. The moment when Derek Richardson understood that every traffic stop, every arrest, every moment of power he'd exercised over the past 4 years had been watched, documented, and judged by someone who had the authority to destroy not just his career, but his freedom. You've been investigating me personally, he said. You became a person of interest 14 months ago when Jennifer Parker's public defender filed a civil rights complaint. The complaint was dismissed due to lack of evidence, but it triggered a federal review of your arrest patterns. Agent Bradford took over the explanation. You were sloppy, Derek. Same phrases. Same excuses. Same outcomes. Your reports read like copies, and patterns don't stay hidden forever. Coached responses? You told them all the same story, Derek. Sharon's voice carried disappointment now, like a teacher who'd discovered her student cheating. Every suspect you planted evidence on supposedly reached toward their waistband, or acted nervous, or fit the profile of known dealers. Your reports were so consistent they read like form letters. The pattern recognition was devastating in its simplicity. Derek Richardson had thought he was smart, but he'd been sloppy in the way that only someone drunk on power could be sloppy. He'd used the same lies so many times that they'd become a signature. The task force was approved 9 months ago, Bradford continued. Director Bailey requested personal oversight because of the severity of the violations and the number of false convictions. So you came here to destroy my life. I came here to get justice for John Leonard, Jennifer Parker, David Rodriguez, and 16 other people whose lives you destroyed because you thought your badge made you God. The weight of it hit Derek all at once. Not just the investigation, not just the arrest, but the understanding that everything he'd built his identity around, the respect, the authority, the power to control other people's lives, had been an illusion. He wasn't a cop. He was a criminal with a badge. My family, he said suddenly. My wife, my kids, they don't know anything about this. Your family will be fine, Derek. The Department of Justice doesn't prosecute spouses for their husbands' crimes. Sharon's voice softened slightly. But your pension is forfeit. Your law enforcement certification is revoked. And civil lawsuits can take more than your badge. Torres, who had been listening to the destruction of his partner's life with growing horror, finally spoke up. What about me? I signed the evidence forms tonight. I witnessed his statement to dispatch. Officer Torres, that depends entirely on how cooperative you are with our investigation. And how honest you are about what you've seen over the past 8 years. The choice hung in the air like smoke. Torres could protect his partner and go down with him. Or he could tell the truth and maybe salvage some fragment of the life he'd built. Derek watched his partner's face and saw the exact moment Torres made his decision. Derek's been planting evidence since I've known him, Torres said quietly. I never reported it because I thought it was just how things worked. And that was the final devastation. Not the federal investigation, not the lost career, not even the prison sentence that was coming. It was watching his partner, the man he'd trained, the man who'd looked up to him, choose truth over loyalty. Derek Richardson was alone, because Anderson had already handed over a list, and Derek's name wasn't the only one on it. Agent Bradford pulled a manila folder from his briefcase, thick enough to contain the end of multiple careers. Officer Richardson, before we transport you to federal holding, there's something you should know about Captain Anderson's cooperation. Derek felt what little hope he'd been clinging to crumble. What list? Names, dates, amounts. Every corrupt Officer Anderson worked with over the past 6 years. Every planted evidence case. Every fixed testimony. Every bribe. Bradford opened the folder. 47 officers across 3 precincts. 89 falsified cases. Anderson kept meticulous records. The blood drained from Derek's face as he understood the implications. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't a single bad cop being held accountable. This was a systematic takedown of an entire corrupt network. The task force has been making arrests all night, Director Bailey said. As we speak, federal agents are knocking on doors, serving warrants, seizing devices, pulling records. By sunrise, this department will lose nearly a third of its sworn officers. Through the station windows, Derek could see more federal vehicles arriving. Black SUVs, unmarked sedans, a mobile command unit. The parking lot looked like a federal staging area. Ramirez was already in cuffs, Bradford said. 2 more names followed before you even blinked. By sunrise, the list would be pages long. Each revelation hit Derek like a physical blow. These weren't just colleagues, they were friends. Men he'd barbecued with, whose kids played with his kids, who'd covered for him when he needed overtime to pay for his daughter's orthodontist bills. You're destroying good cops, Derek said desperately. These men have families, mortgages, kids in college. So did John Leonard, Director Bailey replied. So did Jennifer Parker. So did David Rodriguez. The difference is that their families didn't choose corruption. Derek's phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Text messages from his wife, probably wondering why he wasn't home yet. The overnight shift usually ended at 6 a.m., and Claire always made breakfast for him and their 2 kids before school. He looked at the phone screen and felt his heart break. Asterisk, hey babe, saw the news about federal raids. Hope you're staying safe. Love you. Asterisk. Asterisk, Derek? The neighbors are asking questions. There are news vans on our street. Asterisk. Asterisk, Derek, answer your phone. FBI agents just knocked on our door. Asterisk. The last message was time-stamped 3 minutes ago. My family, he whispered. They're at my house. Standard procedure for corruption investigations, Agent Bradford said without emotion. Search warrants, evidence collection, witness interviews. Derek's hands were shaking now. My kids are 12 and 14. They don't understand this. They're not in danger, Derek. The agents are trained to handle family notifications with sensitivity. Director Bailey's voice carried something that might have been sympathy. But yes, your children are going to learn that their father is a criminal. The weight of it hit him like a sledgehammer. Not just the arrest, not just the prison time, but the moment his daughter Emma would understand why federal agents were searching her house. The moment his son Jake would realize his father wasn't a hero, but a predator who'd destroyed innocent people's lives. I can cooperate, Derek said suddenly, the words tumbling out in a rush. I can tell you everything. Names, dates, who else was involved. I can help you build cases. Derek, you're not understanding the situation. Agent Bradford closed the folder. We don't need your cooperation. Anderson already gave us everything. The other officers are being arrested based on evidence we already have. You're not a witness in this investigation. You're a defendant. The brutal math of it was undeniable. Derek had spent his career believing that cooperation was currency, that a cop who flipped could trade information for leniency. But Anderson had already spent that currency. Every secret Derek might reveal, Anderson had already revealed. Every crime Derek could confess to, Anderson had already documented. Derek Richardson had nothing to trade except his own guilt. There has to be something, he said, and the desperation in his voice made Torres look away in embarrassment. 12 years on the force. 12 years of service. That has to count for something. 12 years of service, Director Bailey repeated. 19 falsified arrests in the past 4 years. How many in the 8 years before that, Derek? How many victims don't we know about yet? The question hung in the air like a sword. Because Derek knew there were more. Not just the obvious plants, but the aggressive searches, the coerced confessions, the reports written to justify excessive force. 12 years of small corruptions that had grown into systematic abuse. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from his wife. Answer it, Director Bailey said. She needs to hear your voice. Derek's hands shook as he pressed the button. Claire, they said you're in federal custody. Derek, what did you do? His wife's voice was high and panicked. He closed his eyes, trying to find words that could somehow explain the unexplainable. Claire, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The kids keep asking if Daddy is coming home, she said, her voice breaking. Derek looked around the station lobby, at Director Bailey, who'd spent months hunting him, at Agent Bradford, who held his future in a manila folder, at Torres, who'd already chosen his own survival over their partnership, at the federal agents streaming through the building like antibodies attacking an infection. I don't know, he said, and the honesty of it felt like a knife in his throat. I don't know if I'm coming home. That's when Claire started crying. Not the controlled sobs of someone trying to stay strong, but the raw, broken wail of a woman watching her life disintegrate in real time. Derek, what did you do? Please, just tell me what you did. Sharon didn't interrupt. She just watched, like she'd been waiting for this call. I planted evidence, Claire. On innocent people. I lied in court. I destroyed families. His voice was steady now, the voice of a man who'd already lost everything and found a strange peace in. Having nothing left to lose. I'm not a good cop. I'm not a good man. And I'm so sorry that you and the kids have to pay for what I've done. The line went quiet except for the sound of his wife crying and the distant voices of federal agents searching through 12 years of his life. How long? She asked finally. How long what? How long have you been lying to me? To the kids? How long have you been someone I don't know? Derek thought about it. Really thought about it. When had the first small compromise led to the second? When had bending the rules become breaking them? When had protecting the guilty become destroying the innocent? 12 years, he said. Since the day I put on the badge. Behind him, Agent Bradford's phone buzzed once. He glanced at the screen, then looked up at Sharon. Director, there's a second folder. And it's worse. Agent Bradford opened a second folder. This one wasn't thick. It was worse, photos and prison IDs. Derek, Director Bailey said quietly, hang up the phone. Claire, I have to go, he said, his voice hollow. Tell the kids, tell them I love them. Derek, please. He ended the call and looked at Bradford. What's in there? David Rodriguez, Bradford said, holding up a current prison ID photo. Remember him? 19 years old, full scholarship, planted evidence case number 12. Derek's stomach dropped. He got 3 years. His sentence should be over. It would be, except for one problem. Bradford pulled out another document. While he was in prison, Rodriguez got into a fight with another inmate. Self-defense, according to witnesses, but the prosecutor used your testimony from his original case to establish a pattern of violent behavior. Rodriguez was convicted of assault and received an additional 4 years. The math hit Derek like a truck. David Rodriguez was still in prison. Still suffering. Still paying for a crime Derek had fabricated. That's not my fault, Derek said automatically. I didn't make him fight. No, but you made him a convicted felon, Director Bailey said. You gave the prosecutor a weapon to use against a 19-year-old kid who was defending himself. Bradford pulled out another photo. Jennifer Parker. Remember her? Lost her nursing license. Derek nodded, not trusting his voice. She's been trying to get her conviction overturned for 2 years. Her lawyer filed an appeal 6 months ago based on new evidence. Your report doesn't match the video, and the baggie's chain of custody was broken." Bradford looked at Derek with something like disgust. "Do you know what the prosecutor's office told her lawyer?" Derek shook his head. "They said that Officer Derek Richardson was a decorated veteran with an exemplary record. They said his testimony was unimpeachable. They denied the appeal. The weight of it was crushing. Not just the original crimes, but the ongoing consequences. Every day Derek had stayed silent. Every day he'd let these people suffer for crimes he'd invented. He'd made the choice to value his own comfort over their freedom." "How many?" Derek asked. 7, Bradford said. 7 people currently in prison or unable to rebuild their lives because of cases you fabricated." Director Bailey stepped closer. "Derek, we're prepared to offer you a choice. A real choice." Here it was. The moment Derek had been both dreading and hoping for since the handcuffs had fallen from his fingers. "Fight it and you're looking at decades. Tell the truth and we'll recommend a significantly reduced sentence." Derek thought about his kids. Emma, 12 years old, who'd always been proud to tell her friends that her daddy was a police officer. He pictured Emma at school, hearing whispers in the hallway before she even knew what the word corrupt meant. But then he thought about David Rodriguez, 23 years old now, sitting in a cell for a fight that happened because Derek had put him there in the first place. "If I fight this, what happens to them?" Derek asked. "Years of appeals. Some might never get out. And if I talk, the ones still inside get emergency reviews fast. The rest get their cases reopened. Your testimony makes the process faster and harder to deny." "There's one more thing," Director Bailey said. "David Rodriguez's mother has been driving 8 hours each way to visit him in prison twice a month for 4 years. She's been working 3 jobs to pay for his legal fees. Last month, she had a heart attack from the stress." Derek closed his eyes. Torres, who had been silent through the entire exchange, finally spoke up. "Derek, man, you have to tell the truth. Those people, they don't deserve this." "And my family?" Derek's voice cracked. "What do they deserve?" "Your family deserves to know who you really are," Director Bailey said quietly. "Just like David Rodriguez's mother deserves to know that her son is innocent. Just like Jennifer Parker deserves to get her life back." The station lobby fell silent except for the distant sound of federal agents processing evidence and the occasional crackle of radio traffic. Derek looked around at the faces watching him. Torres, ashamed but hopeful. Bradford, professional but impatient. Bailey, patient but implacable. This was the moment his entire life had been building toward. Not the traffic stop, not the arrest, not even the investigation. This moment, when Derek Richardson had to choose between the man he'd always been and the man he might still become. Derek thought about going home to his wife and children, whenever that might be, and looking them in the eye knowing that 7 innocent people were suffering because he'd chosen to protect himself instead of doing what was right. "I want to make a statement," Derek said quietly. "Derek," Torres said, relief flooding his voice. "Thank God. I want to testify about every case. Every lie. Every planted piece of evidence." Derek's voice grew stronger with each word. "And I want David Rodriguez's mother to know that her son never should have been in that cell. Not for one day." Agent Bradford nodded and pulled out a digital recorder. "Officer Derek Richardson, you are about to give a voluntary statement regarding multiple civil rights violations. You understand that this statement can and will be used against you in federal court. I understand. And you're making this statement of your own free will, without coercion or promises beyond what's already been discussed." Derek looked around the station one more time, at the badge and uniform that had defined his identity for 12 years, at the building where he'd thought he was serving justice while actually destroying it. "Yes," he said. "I'm making this statement because it's the right thing to do." Finally, and for the first time in 12 years, Derek Richardson told the truth. Then Agent Bradford said, "Start with case number 1. "Case number 1, Derek said. "John Leonard. March 15th, 2021. I stopped him because I could." Agent Bradford's recorder captured every word, but Derek wasn't talking to the machine. He was talking to the ghosts of 19 lives he'd destroyed. There was no probable cause for the stop. No traffic violation. No suspicious behavior. Because he was a black man in the wrong neighborhood, and I knew no one would question me. Derek's voice was steady, almost clinical. I'd been having a bad month with my arrest numbers, and Captain Anderson had made it clear that numbers mattered more than constitutional rights. Director Bailey listened without interruption, but Derek could see her taking notes on a tablet. Every detail would be verified, cross-referenced, and used to build the cases that would free innocent people. Leonard was cooperative, polite. He handed me his license and registration without being asked. He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel. He did everything right. Derek's voice caught slightly. So I decided to destroy his life. How? Bradford asked. I told him I smelled marijuana. He said he didn't smoke, never had, and offered to submit to any test. That's when I knew he was telling the truth. Guilty people don't volunteer for drug tests. Derek closed his eyes, remembering. So I told him to step out of the vehicle while I searched it. And then, I planted a baggie of cocaine in his glove compartment. The same baggie I'd been carrying for 3 months, waiting for the right target. Someone who looked like they wouldn't fight back, wouldn't have expensive lawyers, wouldn't be believed if they claimed police misconduct. Torres was staring at Derek like he'd never seen him before. Jesus, Derek. John Leonard. I remember that arrest. You told me he was acting suspicious. I lied to you too, Mike. I've been lying to everyone for 4 years. Derek continued through the confession methodically. Case number 2. Jennifer Parker. June 3, 2021. Registered nurse driving home from a 12-hour shift at Children's Hospital. He detailed the planted evidence, the false testimony, the destroyed life of a woman who'd spent 3 years saving for her car. The rest. Derek's voice grew hollow. Rodriguez, college kid 3 years gone. Thompson, teacher, lost her license. A veteran. A mechanic. A mother driving home from night shift. Same script. Different lives. 19 cases total, Derek concluded. 19 innocent people whose only crime was being in the wrong place when I decided they looked guilty. Agent Bradford stopped the recording. Derek, that statement is going to destroy your life. You understand that, right? My life was already destroyed. I just didn't know it yet. Director Bailey's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her expression shifted. Not relief, but the grim satisfaction of someone watching justice finally move. Derek, your confession just triggered something we call a rapid response protocol. Starting tonight, emergency motions will be filed in 7 different courts. By tomorrow, David Rodriguez will be eating breakfast as a free man. The lobby erupted in sudden activity. Phones started ringing, agents began moving with purpose, and Derek could hear urgent conversations about transport orders and judicial notifications. What's happening? Torres asked. Justice, Director Bailey said. Fast, comprehensive, and irreversible. She handed Derek her phone. On the screen was an internal alert. Emergency filings initiated 7 cases. Not public. Not yet. But the wheels were turning. That's impossible, Derek said. I just confessed 10 minutes ago. Derek, we've been preparing for this moment for 6 months. Every case file has been reviewed, every motion has been pre-written, every judge has been briefed. Your confession was the last piece we needed to make it all happen simultaneously. Agent Bradford was speaking rapidly into his own phone. Rodriguez motion is filed. Parker injunction is active. Leonard emergency review approved. Each update hit Derek like a wave. These weren't abstract legal proceedings. These were real people getting their lives back in real time. There's something else, Director Bailey said. Your confession doesn't just free the innocent. It exposes something bigger. She handed Derek a different file. Captain Anderson wasn't the top of this corruption ring. He was the middle. Your testimony just gave us everything we need to arrest someone in the courthouse. Someone who made sure your lies stuck. Derek stared at the file. A prosecutor. A name he recognized. People he'd worked with, trusted, respected. How long have you known? 18 months. But we needed someone on the inside, someone directly involved in the evidence planting, to testify about how the system really worked. You just handed us one of the biggest corruption cases this city has ever seen. The final twist wasn't that Derek was a corrupt cop. It wasn't even that his department was corrupt. It was that he'd been a small cog in a machine designed to convert innocent people into statistics, and his confession had just brought down the entire operation. Torres, who had been silent through most of the confession, finally spoke up. What happens to me? Director Bailey consulted her tablet. Officer Torres, you witnessed 19 evidence-planting incidents and failed to report any of them. Your status is pending review. Cooperation matters. But you're not walking away clean. And Derek? All eyes turned to Derek, who was still processing the magnitude of what his confession had unleashed. Derek gets to watch 7 innocent people walk free because he finally did the right thing. And then he goes to federal prison for 6 to 8 years, where he'll have plenty of time to think about the difference between being a cop and being a criminal. But as Derek sat in the station lobby watching federal agents coordinate the release of people he'd wrongfully imprisoned, he realized something that surprised him. For the first time in 4 years, he felt like a police officer again. By sunrise, the first innocent man would walk out of a cell, and Derek Richardson would be led into one. By sunrise, the courthouse doors opened early, and the hallway outside courtroom 3 was already full. Derek sat in the back of a federal transport vehicle, handcuffed but strangely at peace. Through the reinforced window, he could see families gathering on the courthouse steps. David Rodriguez's mother, clutching a folder of legal documents. Jennifer Parker's sister, who'd driven 3 hours to be there. John Leonard, wearing the only suit he still owned. His phone had been returned to him for one final call. The screen showed 17 missed calls from Claire. He dialed. "Derek." Claire's voice was hoarse from crying. "I'm going to federal holding. The kids are asking if you're coming home." Derek watched through the window as David Rodriguez walked out of the courthouse doors, free for the first time in 4 years. "I don't know, but I need them to see what happens today, because it's the only thing I did that was right." There was silence, then Claire crying quietly. "I love the man I married. I don't know who you became. Neither do I. But last night, I tried to be him again." Inside the courthouse, Judge Patricia Hernandez read from an emergency motion in a voice that carried 20 years of judicial authority. In light of newly discovered evidence and Officer Derek Richardson's sworn testimony, this court finds that Mr. David Rodriguez's conviction was based on fabricated evidence and false testimony. The conviction is hereby vacated, all charges dismissed, and the defendant is ordered released immediately. The gavel fell. 24-year-old David Rodriguez walked free. 3 courtrooms over, Jennifer Parker's case was reopened. By week's end, her reinstatement process would begin. Across town, John Leonard was being processed for release while his children waited with a social worker, finally going home to their father. Director Bailey watched from the back of each courtroom, her tablet documenting every overturned conviction, every life restored, every family reunited. The 8-year-old girl who'd watched her father arrested on false charges had grown up to become the woman who made sure corrupt cops answered for their crimes. Back at the police station, Torres was packing his locker under federal supervision. Badge, gun, family photos, all going into a cardboard box along with his career. "Your cooperation has been noted," Agent Bradford told him. "But you're facing suspension without pay, possible charges for failure to report, and permanent notation in your record." Torres thought about Derek in federal custody, facing years in prison for crimes Torres had watched him commit. "I want to make a statement, too. About everything I saw, everything I should have reported. That's your choice. It won't be easy." Neither was staying quiet. 6 months later, Derek stood in federal court as Judge Patricia Hernandez sentenced him to a multi-year federal sentence. David Rodriguez, Jennifer Parker, and John Leonard had all spoken at his hearing. Not forgiving, but acknowledging that his confession had given them their lives back. As the marshals led him away, Derek caught sight of Director Bailey in the gallery. She didn't smile, but she nodded once, a recognition between 2 people who understood that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure the truth, however painful, finally saw light. In his federal cell that night, Derek thought about the traffic stop that had changed everything. He thought about Director Bailey, calm and controlled even with handcuffs on her wrists. He thought about the moment she could have destroyed him quietly, but instead gave him the chance to choose who he wanted to be. For the first time in years, Derek Richardson fell asleep believing he might actually be the police officer he'd always told his children he was. Justice, he'd learned, wasn't just about catching the guilty. Sometimes it was about guilty people catching themselves. Because when the badge becomes the crime, the only way back to honor is through the truth. What did this story teach you about the power of truth over self-preservation? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.